Welcome to The Human Element, presented by Whisk. I'm your host, Barb Bidan, and in each episode, I sit down with CHROs and senior HR leaders to explore how AI, innovation, and human insight are reshaping the future of HR. We'll explore how technology is reshaping leadership, strategy, and the role of HR by sharing candid stories, practical ideas, and strategic perspectives to help you shape the future. The Human Element is brought to you by Whisk, the leader in agentic HR and creator of Harper, the world's first AI HR generalist. Learn how Harper can resolve up to 80% of routine HR tasks autonomously. Learn more about Whisk at whisk.com. Today, my guest is Jadhav, Vice President of Human Resources at Lumen Technologies. And there is a reason that I wanted to get him on the show right now. RJ has spent his career inside some of the most transformative companies in tech. He led HR for Google Cloud during its hypergrowth years. He was a strategic people partner at Microsoft through major shifts in their business. And today he's at Lumen, helping lead one of the most significant enterprise transformations in the telecom and tech space. So what makes RJ different is that he doesn't talk about AI the way most leaders in HR do. He sees it as an accelerant. RJ believes that HR should be leading the AI charter, not waiting for IT or the CEO to hand it down. So a man after my own heart. I love it. And he has this line that I cannot stop thinking about. AI is 70% culture and 30% tools. So today we're going to dig into all of it, how AI actually accelerates transformation, what it looks like when HR owns it, and why culture is the part that everyone underestimates. So RJ, I am so excited to talk to you today. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much, Barb. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, RJ, you have led HR in three of the most transformative companies in tech, Microsoft, Google, and now Lumen. Can you give us the through line? I want to make sure that our listeners understand who we're talking to. What does the arc that you've taken teach you about leading people through change?
That's a great question, Barb. So when I think about my experiences leading HR at Microsoft, Google, and now at Lumen, it all comes down to whether transformation is creating net new value for the business. And you get to do that when you find the right intersection between people, culture, and organizational system. You need to think about those three as an integrated system, not as an individual lever. So I spent the first 15 years of my career at Microsoft, pretty much grew there as an HR professional. And I've learned there how to scale at enterprise level, and the discipline that you need to create consistent leadership systems and processes, and the rigor that you need during transformations. So transformation needs structure, it needs culture, it needs governance, and more than anything else, it needs clarity on decision making. So that's what I focused and learned at Microsoft. Google was slightly different. There was scale, but we needed speed, because we needed to invest in people's strategies that allowed the company to make pretty significant progress in the cloud space. But at the same time, and this is like 6-7 years before when AI was kind of like a big thing. And we needed to kind of think about like, how do we create agility in the organization to create that speed? And then when I think about my experiences at Lumen, fundamentally the transformation at Lumen is all about culture. How are our leaders leading from the front? How the company behaves, operates is super, super important. So when I actually kind of like think about all the lessons that I've learned, it comes down to three things. Leadership is paramount. You have to focus on leadership behaviors. The second one is you have to focus on designing systems and not just interventions. When you actually focus on programs, you might have some incremental value, but it doesn't sustain. And you're actually focusing on a symptom, but not the root cause. So when you focus on designing the system, you're focusing on the root causes, and that's where you actually create sustainable change. And the last one, which I feel very passionate about, is you have to anchor all of this to the business. Where is the business going? What is the opportunity for the business? What's the value that we are creating for the customer?
What great experiences that you have had that bring you to today. And when you reflect back on Microsoft, like a giant company, right, versus a company that's in the middle of a reinvention like Lumen, what is the biggest difference between leading in those two environments?
Yeah, I could go on that topic. I think the context is very important. Microsoft, as you know, very successful organization, has gone through a lot of transformation and changes. But at the same time, Microsoft, it's all about evolving a very established engine versus Lumen, where the process of transforming from a legacy network company to a digital services company for the AI economy. And as such, you need to kind of like rewire the entire company. And when you're doing that, you have to change all the human systems that go along with it. So for me, that's the biggest difference. And of course, at Lumen, we have to do it under a lot of pressure because the transformation is pretty existential for us. So doing that under pressure, and we can't do it very gradually. So I would say though that's like the big difference between working at like Microsoft and now at Lumen.
Yeah, well, and you're about 1 year in at Lumen. What is the moment where you knew that this transformation was absolutely real?
I think I want to kind of answer it in two different ways. One is what certainly is visible externally. And then I'll kind of talk about internally. So when you kind of like look at the Lumen journey over the last 2 years, what we have been able to do, we have been able to make decisions to actually gain ourselves financial freedom. We have been able to invest deeply in our product so that we are innovating and becoming a product led company to become a digital services network company. We have actually amazing partnership with hyperscalers like Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google, which has allowed us to have multi-billion dollar opportunities with them. And if you look at just the confidence from an external perspective, whether it's our shareholders, whether it's our investors, whether it's analysts, that has gone up. So I feel like there have been pretty significant, very meaningful proof points of our transformation. And we feel extremely great about those. We celebrate that, but at the same time, it kind of like energizes us and it kind of like fuels our ambition and drive. When I kind of like think about like, hey, internally, things that might not be obvious, I don't necessarily think there's a moment, but I probably would say there are certain moments because I'm all about never get too excited about just one moment because one moment is not a trend. And what I have seen the company do, especially at the leadership level, is the company has taken very decisive actions to focus, to prioritize on the opportunity. The company, the leadership team, the organization demonstrates a lot of courage to name interferences that are slowing us down. And we do that recognizing that transformation is hard. It's actually very taxing. And it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you need to deeply, deeply invest in your culture and your talent. So when I kind of like think about all these are the moments that make me feel like this transformation is once in a generation opportunity. And sorry, you were about to say something.
No, I mean, you said that there were pretty big things. I would say very big things, right? You have
Mhm.
a lot ahead of you. I mean, it's no wonder that you are needing to accelerate and you talk about the use of AI as an accelerant, right? Not a destination. I'm curious as you think about the transformation that you're going through, what does that mean in practice, AI as an accelerant when you're trying to go through this transformation that you are?
Yeah, for me, it's pretty simple that AI is not the destination. It's not the goal. Business impact is the goal. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that I think our CEO, Kate Johnson, and the senior leadership team has done a fabulous job. Not only did they create a North Star, which a lot of companies do, but it's very hard to actually have a playbook to get to that North Star. And we have a playbook that's very tangible, that's very deeply understood by the entire company. Even externally, we have been sharing a lot of that. So from an HR perspective, what it allowed us to do is to say, now I can actually create a 3-year people strategy that's deeply anchored in where the company wants to go. And we didn't start with like, hey, let's actually think about like all the AI projects that we can do. That was not our starting place. Our starting place was, what can we do to accelerate the business? Now, with AI, it has now given us permission to think about taking moonshots that otherwise would have taken us more time. It would have taken us more resources, more effort. So we now have a 3-year people strategy, as I said, deeply anchored to where the business wants to go. And within that people strategy, we have used AI in a very deep way where we said, what are some efforts that would be AI led? So as an example, if you think about like talent acquisition, that area, you're seeing a lot of innovation in general from an AI perspective that is enhancing not only a candidate experience, but actually driving a lot of efficiency within the company from a hiring manager standpoint as well. So that's an example of how we are thinking about AI-led work. But then there's a lot of work which is enabled by AI. So as we think about becoming this digital services company, we need to reimagine the entire workforce. So as part of that, how are we thinking about leveraging AI and answering some of the tough questions? So that's a great example, I believe, where we are using AI as an accelerant versus like an add-on programmatic, shiny, bright object.
Yeah, I mean, and when AI acts as an accelerant in places like that, like looking at the data or any other place, right, where it's really accelerated, have you seen anywhere where leaders maybe underestimated how powerful of an accelerant AI would be in the business?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. A lot of different things come to mind. I'll share something that, Barb, we have been deeply focusing on at Lumen over the last 2 years, at least from the time that I have joined the company. When you are going through a transformation, this notion of capacity comes up a lot. Is there enough capacity? Because as I mentioned to you, this transformation is existential for us. And we need to kind of transform every aspect of how we go about running the organization. And in context of that, we have been spending a lot of time to like say, how do I make sure that I am protecting leadership capacity? Because when you're doing transformation, you need to kind of create the space for deep reflection, deep thinking, because that's where new ideas, new ways of going about doing things differently actually come. You just can't rely on muscle memory where you have done something for like more than a decade or 2 decades. That could be very dangerous. So in that particular context, I think a lot of people underestimate the potential AI has in creating capacity, not only at the leadership level, but at the organizational level.
I could not agree more with that statement. And I mean, in a hyper growth company, right? And I've worked through hyper growth and transformation. And it is true that the leadership capacity to have time and space to think has been
Yeah.
tough to find, right? And I think that the space, right, is what you're ultimately saying, the space that is created by AI, like AI efficiency perhaps, to allow leaders to be doing deep thinking that allows them to plan for the right
Yeah.
things and plan for the right strategy for the business is massive, because what were we doing when we weren't finding time for that, right? It's a little concerning, but the fact that you're leveraging AI to get that
Yeah.
space back is fantastic. Sure.
Yeah, what I would also add is this is like a personal journey for me. I actually feel pretty good about the company investing in AI fluency. I hope we'll have a chance to kind of talk a little bit about that. But I have deeply invested in my own understanding, learning, acumen of AI. And one of the other recent learnings is we use Copilot, and I used to use Copilot as a productivity hack. And I got really, really excited about just the productivity that I've gained. I'm now in the process of transitioning from using AI in this particular instance, Copilot, not just as a productivity hack versus a leadership system. So this is something that I've learned from our CHRO. A couple of months ago, I've asked Copilot and I wrote this prompt that said, based on my exec AI maturity, come up with a framework and tell me how I'm actually leveraging AI across 5 different dimensions on strategic topics, on the breadth of topics, the quality of topics, integration of topics, and I'm forgetting one. And it gave me this analysis and it scored me on a 5 point scale. And it's scored me on 4 on 5 on quality of the work that I do with AI, on the breadth of topics, like things like, hey, you're using it to synthesize and be concise from an exec communications perspective. You're actually using it for research as a thought partner. But there are one or two areas where it said, like, hey, you could actually go much deeper. And it's like having a coach that's 24/7 available to you when you need it and say, what would that look like? Look at the three different things that I've been leading over the past month and tell me what I would have done differently. And it has been absolutely enlightening to say, I didn't think about using AI in that particular context, just from my own productivity standpoint. So I'm maturing, and a lot of leaders at Lumen are maturing. We invest a lot. We work pretty closely with Howard University. We work with Microsoft as one of their frontier firm companies, and it gives us a lot of opportunities to continue to like invest in our learning agility.
What a major unlock you've described. And so I'm going to follow you on that deep dive and start to dive in on some of the things within our own HR teams, right? So, and that learning that needs to happen. What is one capability that you think your HR team needs to build before the AI becomes truly useful to them or provides that kind of unlock that you just described AI providing for you when you started using it in a new way?
I think it has to be AI fluency, AI literacy. And there is so much of content, there's so much of podcasts like these, where now it's so easy to kind of like very quickly learn things that otherwise would have taken like weeks and months. So I would say we already, if we are a strong HR function or a solid HR professional, you already have a lot of the skills to be successful. What you need now is understanding of what AI can do. And when I kind of like talk a couple of minutes about the people strategy, one of the things that it allowed us to do is now that we understand AI deeply, not just at a superficial level, meaning we actually sat down with engineers to like say, help us understand large language models. We actually went to Microsoft and we learned from them as to like say, help us understand the technology. And by the way, I think we all will end up becoming technologies, whatever field of profession we are in, not technologies with a capital T, but maybe with a small t. That's the notion of like you have to be comfortable. You don't need to be an expert in it. Because if you understand and if you understand where to use AI, how to use it, what to watch out for, where you don't want to compromise, how do you actually create governance? It allows you to kind of like dream big. It gives you an opportunity to say, I now can take moonshots that I never knew. So that's probably where I would want everybody to start is like AI literacy.
Well, and as you take your team deeper, right? Like even thinking about like having an HR team, right? Understand what an LLM is, right? And going deeper to truly understand the tools and technology that we're working with. And speaking of dreaming big, right? You do have a strong point of view. The HR should be leading the AI charter inside the company. I love that. You know, not that we're, following the charter set elsewhere. Where does that point of view stem from? Why HR and why now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's been a discussion topic in a lot of like circles. I think it fundamentally comes down to, I'll just use transformation as an example. When you are transforming a company, and even if you're not transforming as a company, but you're introducing change, you have to go to the fundamental of what an organization is, the basic unit of work, and how does actually work get done? How does it flow? And when you're actually thinking about rewiring that and you're kind of like reconstructing the architecture of how work gets done, there are so many different things that come into play. Who best can do that? Who best can lead an HR? Because that's our wheelhouse. So when you think about like enabling the organization through the change, when you think about creating the from and to as to how work gets done, when you think about implications of that on culture, because you got to be careful when it comes to AI, because AI will amplify the culture that you have, good or bad. And if you don't address that deeply, if you don't actually understand that there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of confusion in AI. There's a lot of anxiety amongst employees around it. And if you don't address all of it, you're treating it as a tool rollout, which it is not. So for all the things that I mentioned, I feel like this is our wheelhouse. This is the craft that we are really good at. Of course, we can't do this in silos. We have to do it in partnership with like legal, with marketing, with sales, with product. But I do feel like we have earned the credibility to actually lead. In fact, one of the things that Lumen that we have recently done is the CEO and the leadership team and the board have recognized that HR actually leads from the front, even through the transformation. And our CHRO now has an expanded role where Anna White is not only the Chief People Officer for Lumen, but she's the Chief AI Enablement Officer. And I'm starting to see that shift in the industry. It's not common, but I'm starting to see that happen, which I think is a deep recognition that we have to change human behaviors. And therefore, I feel like who else but us?
Who else but us, right? I think if in places where you're seeing HR be further removed from the conversation, ultimately it boils down to, in my opinion, which I think is what you were saying too, is that maybe we haven't started with the work in that case. And we're approaching it like a tool problem. When you go down to the basic unit of work, this becomes the most massive of our time so far, in my opinion, work design problem. And how would you not have
Absolutely.
your HR leadership team involved in that? So I know you are eager to dive into some of the things you are doing and a little bit more about your HR team's strategy around deploying AI or leading from the front. What can you share about some of the ways that you're thinking about this transformation from the specific side of your HR team?
Yeah, so I kind of briefly talked about like the people strategy, and
Yeah.
we have three focus areas. One is how do we redesign the organization and enable the company to go from being a legacy network company to a digital first service company ready for the AI economy. And as part of that, I kind of talked about many things that needs to be true from an org design, redesigning the workforce. The second focus area is around building the talent for the future. And that's where we are seeing a lot of use cases for AI to drive experiences, but also to drive efficiency that gives us speed. And then we are deeply focused on how do we actually reskill and rebuild. One of the project to kind of like bring to life an example is we are actually role by role doing pilots to say, if I actually break down this particular role into work that's repetitive, it's transactional, probably does not need the human ingenuity to address it. Can we automatize it? Automation comes into play. Are there aspects of the role that we feel like can be agentified? An example I can think of is like, hey, pulling insights from data. Can we agentify that? Great. And then are there aspects of it that deeply have to be human centered and we want the human in the middle of it? So that's an example of some of the work where we are actually saying we don't want to rush this. It's way too important to strike the right balance between where we want to actually be deeply human centric, but at the same time leverage AI. And we are doing multiple pilots across the company to learn from that, because whatever we learn from that will allow us to say, where can I use a BPO model? Where can I actually use automation? Where can I actually create agents at the end so that humans have more capacity to focus on things that they uniquely can do, where more judgment, more understanding of the context is used. That's one example of some of the work that we are doing. And the third area is around deepening culture and leadership. I strongly believe that our culture and leadership have been a differentiator for us, but we are actually saying we got to take it next level. So we're doing a lot around enabling our leaders to say, what does it mean for leaders to actually lead a workforce where you actually will have humans and agents side by side? So those are some of the examples.
Well, when you think about developing to the next generation of HR leaders within your team, what are the skill sets that this next generation of HR leaders will need to lead the type of transformation that you're talking about? Are they different skills than we've needed before? Are they the same?
That's a great question. I have a slightly different view from a lot of what I'm hearing in the industry. If we are talking about a very successful HR professional or a successful HR team, I'm going to assume that you're really good at your ability to understand the business, understand how work gets done across the enterprise. I also am going to assume that these are the folks that are really good at their craft, meaning they're very good at systems thinking. And I also feel like, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, the ability for HR to lead in ambiguity has gone up. Even if you look at just COVID, we led from the front. So I do feel like we have all the foundational skill sets, capabilities that we need in this AI space as well. The two things that I would actually say that we need to kind of like sharpen, one that I talked about previously, is get comfortable with AI. Your AI influency should be pretty high because you want to be able to influence leaders across the organization on opportunities. So that's one. The second one would be around confidence. Trust in yourself and in the function and say yes to business problems, knowing that you can always rely on your people. So those are two things that I would probably focus on.
And I actually love that you framed it as not new things. Your assumption is that we have those things. And I agree because a lot of us do. But if your HR team or your HR leaders don't have sort of the deep understanding of the business, the ability to be systems thinkers, or the ability to function well in ambiguity, those are definitely skills to hop
Yeah.
on top of right now. So I'm going to bring us back to something you started to talk about a minute ago, but warrants coming back to is culture. So I want to stick with this one for a minute. You say that AI is 70% culture and 30% tools. So unpack that a little bit for me.
Yeah. I wish I can take credit for saying that, but I actually borrowed it from our CHRO who talks about like 70% culture and 30% is tool. And a lot of what we have kind of talked about already, Barb kind of like lends to that notion of like focus on culture. Let me make it real for you. Let me use an example.
Love it.
So during a transformation, you want to see high performance. High performance comes not because everybody has goals, it comes when there is clarity. One of the things that we talked about Lumen is clarity is kind. So we have, I want to say, upwards of 70,000 individual goals across all of our employees. How do I make sure those goals, one, are written in a way that they are high quality? They actually follow the SMART framework, that they are specific, they are measurable. But more importantly, how do I know that there's alignment to what everybody is doing to the North Star for the company? And typically, historically, what I have done, what I have seen a lot of people do is to say, hey, we can go in, whatever tool that you use to capture goals, you pull a sample of goals, you ask your people analytics team to do some analysis, which is manual, time consuming. It's a very small sample size, and you have some insights, and then it comes too late in the process. What we have been able to do is we wanted to kind of focus on culture first. We said we have something called the Lumen 8. It's about, let me see if I can say all the eight: teamwork, trust, transparency, customer obsession, courage, clarity, respect, and growth mindset. Yay, all eight. But there are a few things that we felt like in context of AI, these are important. One around trust, one around transparency, courage, and growth mindset. So we said in a company where we want to drive that alignment, we need to start with culture. And we took these cultural aspects and say, how do I make sure that there's alignment? So we created a first party AI tool in partnership with our product team. We call it Gold Pro. It does such a fabulous job. I'm so excited to share some of the metrics with you. It's a dynamic tool, and within a matter of seconds, it actually tells me to what extent are the goals written in smart format and what is the alignment to the North Star. So if I'm an employee, I go into writing my tools, a coach comes along and says, like, I'm going to help you write your goals in the smart framework. So you are actually giving people guidance in the moment, and they can actually use a lot of like resources from the inventory. And as a manager, I can see the goals of people on my team, do they actually align to my goals? And organizationally, we actually recently did an analysis which literally took minutes for us to say, we went from the goals being 50% written in Smart to more than 90% written in Smart Framework. And we saw more than 90% alignment to 70,000 individual goals to the company's North Star. And that's amazing. That's a moonshot that I'm talking about that we would have probably not been able to accomplish without AI. But our starting point was not technology or tools. Our starting point was culture. What are some cultural things that we want to change in the company? And where do we bring technology to make that happen? We also have a transformation scorecard. And I have the ability to say, all the execs in the company, all the VPs in the company, give me an analysis to show how their goals align to this company transformation, because we also pay our employees based on the performance of the transformation. And I can sit down with different leadership teams and say, there is misalignment for these three metrics from the sales organization. We got to fix it. So that's an example of bringing it to life, what I mean when I say like, hey, a lot of the work around AI is 70% culture and 30% tools.
Yeah, I mean, our visibility to that data, you're talking about 70,000 goals is I think the number that you said, right? Like that's 70,000 rows of data. Like how were we looking at that before absent a tool, right?
Yeah.
I actually just came through a very similar pilot with my team. Same thing, Smart Goal Coach that actually does like evaluate so that we don't have to do it. They evaluate connectedness to the larger objective that to which they ideally should be tied, identifies things that are off course, identifies misalignment. But the biggest thing, which sounds simple, but how important, if your teams are not writing smart goals, right? Just good goals that are measurable, impact to performance and uplift in a company, if you just start doing that, and AI can do that for you today, and your team can actually work through building it. I love it. So I could go on about these topics all day. This has been a super thought-provoking conversation for me, RJ. So I appreciate it. I want to bring us to a close, to the lightning round. So some quick hit questions that just sort of first thing that comes to mind here for each of these. So a little more tactically, what is one tool that you use every week that has absolutely changed how you work?
Copilot every single hour.
Every hour of every day, for sure. The HR practice that you believe that AI will replace first?
I think repetitive transactional work.
Agreed. And then the HR practice that AI will never touch?
I think anything that requires context and judgment, anything that requires understanding of deep human behavior, I think that's squarely with the humans.
The human things. The best leader that you have ever worked for in a single sentence?
Oh, wow. I've worked with some really good. It's a lightning rod, so I'll keep it brief. A couple of leaders come to mind. My current leader comes to mind as well. Somebody who says yes to problems because they're confident about their craft and they're confident that their people can figure it out.
Absolutely. That everything is figure outable. And when you have a smart team and confidence in them, that gets even easier. So last one, advice to a newer HR leader who's walking into their first transformational role.
I would say double down on understanding the business. It's something that I think we have been talking about for like decades now, and it's still true. The more you understand, not just the financial acumen, not just the business acumen, how actually work gets done. We talked a little bit about like the basic unit of work. You don't need to be an expert, but that understanding will unlock where you actually want to lead in. And I think everything else will follow.
Fantastic. So this was a super rich conversation. I do my best to get some takeaways for the audience from what we talked about today. So the first one is your point that change requires you to get three things right simultaneously. The leadership is the first. Second is designing the right system, right? And this is not about interventions, it's about systems. And then the third is not forgetting to anchor to the business. So I loved that insight. I've got a quotable on number 2, AI is not the destination. The business impact is the goal. And I just want to let that sit right there on its own. We should never lose sight of that. The business impact is the goal. The next one was, and we have talked about this a lot on the show, but I loved the take that you brought it back to. It's like focusing on the work, right? Getting things down to the basic unit of work, and just your reminder to differentiate between, if you're truly getting it to the kernel, there's 3 things, right? There's repetitive and transactional work, prime for automation. There's the work that is primed for agentic type solutions. And then there is the deeply human-centered work that is right for us deeply centered humans who are still over here working on teams, right? And then last but not least, we talked a little bit about developing the HR leaders of the future. You obviously have an amazing team that you are very proud of. And what you talked about, again, is underscore 3 times, right, in my recap, understanding the business. That is integral. Becoming a systems thinker and then being able to thrive in ambiguity. So I loved that reminder. Those are the skills that we really, if we do not have them as leaders today, if we do not have them in our leadership teams, those are what we should be thinking about. It has been an absolute pleasure. RJ, I always give guests the final word. So as we wrap, what is one thing that you want HR leaders who have listened to our conversation today to go ahead and think about or continue thinking about on the rest of their drive home?
Yeah, this has been wonderful. So thank you for having me. I would probably, my parting words would be, because I get this question a lot, we didn't get a chance to talk about it, is there's just the anxiety on when to use AI and when not to use AI. The principle that I use is, if it sharpens my judgment, use it. If it's actually discounting your judgment, do not use it. And then to make it very practical for somebody who is listening to this and want to do something, I think it depends on where they are in the journey. If they're early in the journey, we talked about AI fluency, block a day out. Go read up, learn, watch, talk to people about AI. You can actually learn a lot in a very short period of time using AI or even talking to people in other companies. And if you are further in the journey, I would ask you to slow down and reflect to say, are you actually investing in AI in places that's going to accelerate the business? Or is it all over because you don't want like 1,000 flowers to bloom? You want like 1 or 2 things that will further the business in a very significant way. So those would be my parting words.
I love that. We need to be moving fast, but not so fast that we lose sight of the business and choosing the purposeful solutions that will deliver the biggest impact. So such great insight. I have enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Barb, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on The Human Element, presented by Whisk. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow The Human Element wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Barb Bidan. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.